Climate change is affecting U.S. military bases, damaging them with floods and other natural disasters. The increasing frequency of these events could lead to big consequences for America's armed forces. Kiran Jivnani is a consultant with the GeoTech Center at the Atlantic Council. Kiran, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what are the vulnerabilities that DoD bases and installations are currently or potentially facing from climate change?
Sure. So there are a lot of potential things that the DoD is facing. Inevitably, unchecked climate change is going to lead to, and in many cases has already led to, severe weather disasters, which then have the potential to exacerbate global instability through things like forced migration, resource deprivation, agricultural declines leading to global hunger, all of which can lead to increased conflict and the need for increased military missions, such as humanitarian and aid missions. So really, climate change is not only going to impact DoD installations, but it's also going to impact their missions and their preparedness in the future.
What happened at Offutt Air Force Base in 2019?
Sure. So in 2019, Offutt Air Force Base was experiencing extreme flooding after a bomb cyclone flooded the Missouri River. And although the extent of the flooding may have taken some by surprise, the risks to Offutt Air Force Base were long known by the US military and other relevant government agencies. But despite knowing that this base was vulnerable to floodings, agencies acted slowly. And estimates indicate that the disaster would have cost a lot more to repair than it would have cost to prevent. In fact, preventative action would have only cost around $22.7 million, but instead, after the fact, Congress had to approve approximately $650 million for a 4-year rebuilding effort. That's a huge difference in cost, and frankly, that cost comes out of taxpayer money.
Your article says that since the Gulf War, the U.S. has lost more F-22s to climate change than to enemy combatants. That's surprising.
Yeah, it is. And it's something that a lot of people don't realize is that the US military is actually prepared for the missions that it carries out, but it's not prepared to face the threat of climate change. And therefore, when things like hurricanes destroy Air Force Base Tyndall, which at the time housed around 1/3 of the Air Force's F-22 Raptor stealth fighters, they didn't know how to deal with it. And in fact, the Air Force did try to deal with it in advance in some ways. They tried to put 17 of these F-22s into a hangar, only for the hangar's roof to collapse on itself and damage them anyway, showing that they underestimated the potential strength of Hurricane Michael. And this is a pattern that keeps happening, where we see that the Air Force and other relevant military branches are not prepared to deal with the forces of climate change.
But Kiran, has this impacted readiness?
Yeah, I think to an extent it has already impacted readiness, but I think this is more of a future threat as we see increasing weather events. As of right now, the US military has already started taking steps to analyze the bases that are most vulnerable, and they've started looking at preventative action. If they carry through with this, then I think mission readiness is going to be a lot more secure. But if they're faced with constant hurdles, then I think in the future, mission readiness is going to be a little bit more problematic, because as of right now, global temperatures are only increasing and these climate events are set to only get worse.
So what does DoD need to do right now to future-proof the military bases?
Sure. So I think there are a few things that they can do. They can take a proactive approach to strengthening these bases as opposed to a reactive approach. And again, we've already started to see this. They can also invest more in smart technologies that allow them to actually future-proof their bases. And they can also invest more in their people and in relevant trainings that are going to be needed to combat threats of the future caused by climate change.
Is there a particular base that you think is most at risk that you would urge the Pentagon to address immediately?
I'm not sure if I would say there is an immediate one, but I would say that a good place to start in looking at this is actually in the 2019 report that the DoD released themselves, where they analyzed 79 priority installations. And they found that already 2/3 of these military installations are critically threatened by climate change. That's where I would start. I mean, in fact, 53 of them out of the 79 face threats from flooding, 43 face threats from drought already, and 36 are currently facing threats from wildfires. So that's where I would start in, narrowing it down and setting priorities.
And do you think that private industry can get involved in helping the DoD with this? Is that something that you think would be necessary?
Yeah, of course. In fact, they've already started. Deloitte recently released a report talking about how smart military bases should be logical extensions of smart cities. And the key benefit to having smart military bases within smart cities would be that the inclusion of technologies would allow for flexibility and the adaptiveness that are needed to carry out primary mission responsibilities irrespective of dynamic threats like a changing climate. Additionally, smart bases can be built incrementally over longer periods of time, which then allows for a bit more physical flexibility and the opportunities to test vulnerabilities via strategic reviews or wargaming.
All right. Well, Kiran, I appreciate your work on this and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.